This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video we are going to go ahead and download Visual Studio Code and Get. If you already have Visual Studio Code and or Get installed, you can go ahead and skip ahead to the section where we go through and configure our Visual Studio Code environment for our JavaScript class. Let's go ahead and get started. If you do not have Visual Studio Code currently installed on your computer, you want to navigate to code.visualstudio.com/download, and this is going to be where you can download Visual Studio Code to your computer. Now this is free. You want to make sure that you pick the right configuration for your operating system. We have the Windows and we have the Mac. If you go ahead and click on the Windows, it should auto-detect which particular version that you need. It should be doing the installer version. You can also go ahead and click on the installer as well. The x64 and ARM64 should work the same. However, when you get to the Mac, you're going to want to click on the individual chip, whether it's an Intel chip or an Apple Silicon. Make sure for Windows that you use the installer. If you click on the Windows here, it should do that. I think the Mac should go ahead, if you're sitting on a Mac, should auto-detect as well. Once you have Visual Studio Code downloaded, you want to go ahead and run the installation process, whether it's unzipping on the Mac or in the case of Windows, whether you're going to run the installer and get it installed on your computer. Once you've completed that, then you want to go to get-scm.com/downloads. And currently I'm on the Mac, but the downloads page is going to take you here. If you click on the Mac, it's going to give you the instructions on how you can download it. The easiest way is probably to use Xcode, but you can use Homebrew to install it as well. If you go back, then for Windows, it's going to give you the setup for a Windows 64 or an ARM64. Make sure that you know what type of chip your computer has so you pick the right installer package. Now going through the Get setup, I've already got Get installed. If you're unsure whether you have Get installed, you can hold off for a minute. When we get into Visual Studio and start our configuration process, I'll show you how you can check to see if it's installed. And if not, then you can pause and go back and download it and get that set up. But this is going to allow for us to connect to GitHub. Next week, we'll be using GitHub to do our source control. But for our first week, we're not going to bother with that. But we want to do some configuration setup so that we're ready for that step next week. So go ahead, run the installer, setup using all of the default options that it provides, and then you should be in good shape. Once you have that done, then we're going to switch over and open up Visual Studio Code. It should look something like this. It may be in a white tone. I have the dark theme selected. We'll go through how you can set your themes. I use this for other things. I think I reinstalled it, so it has some of my configurations, but it doesn't have any of my extensions any longer, so that it is as clean as possible to emulate what you might see when you install a fresh version of Visual Studio Code. Now, one of the things that you'll see here is the welcome screen when you enter. It may be that you find the welcome screen annoying and you don't want to see it after a bit. You can always turn it off by unchecking the show welcome page on startup. And if you close this, the next time it should not open that welcome page. But later, there are some times if you install a new type of an extension, it has different types of actions that kind of step you through how to configure things that are kind of nice. And you may want to see that back. You can always come to the help window and turn on the welcome option again and recheck this, and then it's going to show up for you automatically again. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go through and take a look at some of those options, like maybe a new color theme. Maybe you don't like the default color theme. You want to take a look at some of the other color themes that might be out there. We have two different ways that we can access themes or some of our settings. The first way is through the File menu. We can go to our Preferences And then underneath our preferences, we can see that we have such things like profiles, settings, extensions, keyboard shortcuts, configure snippets, tasks, and themes. And we can go ahead and change the color theme that way. It's going to bring up the dialog. The second way is we can come down to our manage. This is a little bit more direct. We don't have to drill through so many different options. We can come in, select color theme, and it's going to bring up that same dialog. Right now I'm sitting at dark modern. If I wanted to change it maybe to can be dark, you can take a look, see that that changes that. I can always come back in and rechange it. Maybe I want to see what quiet light looks like. That gives me a different option. And you want to make sure that you're going to find the theme that's going to make you the most productive and help with any eye fatigue that you might have. So make sure that you make an informed choice. You can always change it at any point in time. I do like a dark theme, so I'm going to go back and pick the dark modern. And this is usually my standard that I use when I'm coding. Now, another thing that you can do is you can change the font setting size. And we're going to first go ahead and open up some source code. If you go back to the assignment, and in the assignment, you should find that we can download the Mirac textbook source code, and this is going to be the book apps, and you'll want to go ahead and download that, put it in a folder, and extract that zip file. All of the textbook source files are going to be there from the samples that it shows in the code throughout the textbook, and you can go ahead and download that. We want to go ahead and open that source code. So we're going to come back into Visual Studio Code. This may be the first time anybody has ever done this. When we open Visual Studio Code, we open folders. So it's essentially acting like whatever we have in our file system. We're just going to open a folder, and it's going to show us the contents within that folder. So I'm going to go ahead and open, and this is going to be our open folder. Navigate to the directory that we stored it in. I believe it's in my book apps. And essentially I can go ahead and select the folder. And it's going to bring in all of the folders. And since this was downloaded from the internet, it's going to ask me to trust the parent folder. And I can go ahead and see that I have code here. And if I would go ahead and open maybe my index.html, and I look at it and I find that it's hard to read, it looks pretty small, I want to make sure that I increase the font size, I can go back through my file preferences, go into my settings, or I can come down to my manage and go into the settings here. Now, obviously, this is going to be one that people change frequently. I can go ahead and set this maybe to 24. And then when I change it and go back, I should see that it's a little bit larger, a little bit easier for me to see. And I'll probably leave it at this size because it's more conducive to actually seeing it in videos. Now, once we have our code file changed and we see that the text setting is there, one of the other things that we do is we're going to have terminal windows that potentially we want to be able to type out commands in. It's going to show debug messages. You know, if we have any syntax errors, it's going to show those within the IDE if we're running in debug mode. And we might want to change how this appears, because if we start typing things, and one of those things that I said that you could type to figure out whether you had Git installed, I can type in Git, I get my keys on the right, fingers on the right keys, Git dash version. That should show me what version, but that is pretty small. So how can I change that? I go back to my manage and go into settings. I can also use the search, and maybe I want to go ahead and look for terminal. And it's going to bring up all those things that are based off of terminal. And I can scroll through this list and see there should be font size somewhere. I can also continue with adding font, and we can see the terminal integrated font size here is 14. I could change that to 24, and we can see that now it is a lot larger. So if you're having problems reading some of these commands, if I would go ahead and type it now, it's going to be pretty large for that Git version, and we can see that now that information is a little bit more readable for us. Now, that's changing the font size for the terminal window. That's changing the font size for our source code. Now, one of the other things that we want to do for configuring our get is we want to go ahead and put in our user and email. Now, when we do this, our email address should be our student S number account that we use for Rock Valley. We will be setting up our GitHub account using the student S number that you have for Rock Valley. You want to go ahead and do a couple different commands. The first one, we need to set our username. So this is going to be get config -- global space user dot name, and this could be within double quotes your name, Jennifer Kunkel, and go ahead and hit enter. Once we have that, then we want to go ahead and do the get config -- global user dot email, and this is going to be your user email for Rock Valley. Yours is going to be an S number. In my case, it's not an S number. Okay, then I would go ahead and hit enter. My GitHub account is actually set up with a different one, so I'm not going to use that, but that would be what you would enter. So you would go ahead and hit enter and process that, and you would be all set up next week to then go ahead and get started with GitHub. Now, one of the other things that we want to do is we want to go through how we can install the two extensions that we're going to be using in this class. If you've not seen, we have the first option that gives us the source files, so we can click on it, and it's going to show us the list of files for our open folder. We have a search option, so if we want to do a search and replace of all the files, we can do that. We'll be looking at this next week. This is our source control. We have the debugger. We'll take a brief look at that in the validation video for the open and live server option. And then we also have the extensions. So this is the last icon. If we click on the extensions, it's going to show us popular extensions. It's going to show us what's installed. Currently, there's nothing installed. And then it gives us a list of recommended. We don't necessarily need to pick anything from the list of recommended. What we want to do is we want to type in open in browser, and it's going to give us the option. Now the open in browser is going to give us this small blue install button. We can click on that. It's going to ask us if we want to go ahead and trust and install it. And that's going to be the one that the textbook wants us to use. One of the issues with this particular extension, we'll talk about it a little bit, and I'll show you what that looks like when we are trying to go through the validation process of the open in browser, is that there are certain features that won't work if we're just using this extension. Therefore, we want to go ahead and install a second extension, and this is going to be the one that we should be using most. We'll go through the process of looking at how to use the open in browser so that you're familiar and can follow along with what the textbook is talking about. But for the most part, we want to use this other one because it's going to treat things more like an actual web server, even though it's not really going to have a real web server installed. And this is going to be live server. So if I type in live, it's going to bring up live server, and I can go ahead and install this. Trust and install, and that should be the installation of the things that we need to do. The only other thing that I wanted to maybe show you is there are other themes that are out here If you wanted to do like a different theme, you don't like any of the ones that are by default installed with Visual Studio, you can come through and pick out some of the other themes that are out there and install those and then select them through the same process that we did before. You have to install them before you can actually do that. But once you do that, you can use different ones than what come as the default installed. I don't really get too much into using themes outside of the ones that are installed by default, but you have additional options there. So that's going to cover it for this video. In the next video, we are going to go through and step through using the Open in Browser extension, and this is going to be where you need to take a snapshot for the Open in Browser, and then we'll go through a separate video for the live server and take a snapshot there for your assignment.